as Ken Branagh pointed out, it's actually Ken or Kenneth, is he Sir, isn't he?
I think
Your
I don't think
O'Queen.
I think you call him Ken.
Ken. Anyway, it is clearly his most personal film to date. He wrote and directed it, took inspiration from his own childhood in Belfast, and he spoke about the incident in his childhood that kind of sparked all of this when he lived on a street that he knew and that he understood, and everyone knew his name, and then the rise of the Troubles, and suddenly there were barricades and bridges and divisions, and he talked about how he remembered this. And so this is kind of then turned into this story in which newcomer Jude Hill is Buddy, who's a 9-year-old in Belfast, whose father, played by Jamie Dornan, has to go across the water to work. And he's left largely in the care of his mum, and his concerns are the concerns of a 9-year-old. He's fallen in love with a girl in the class. And
As you do.
And she's very clever. And he's very worried. He wants to sit next to her, but in order to sit next to her, because the class is designed in sort of top tier, the cleverer you are, the nearer you are to the teacher. And he's not quite clever enough to be on the top table. He hasn't done well enough in the test, but he's working really hard to get to be on the right table. And then just as he does, something happens, so she moves down. And this is what his life is concerned with. And his pop and his granny, who are played by Kieran Hines and Judi Dench, are there to help and to offer advice. And the thing he has to do now is a project about the moon landings. Here's a clip.
We have to do a project about the moon landing.
Well, did those boys not come back from that?
They did. Now we have to cut things out of the papers and explain how they got there.
If they did get there, they did get to the moon. It's not what it says here. God doesn't like it.
And I watched every night, too, that they were up there. And how did I never see Mike Collins in the mothership doing his orbit? Surely you would have seen the shape of Columbus against the light of the moon.
No, that's because mostly he was on the dark side.
Exactly. It's the side that Lucifer hangs his shillelagh.
No, look, he was on the dark side of the moon most of the time where we couldn't see him. When he was doing his orbit, and then maybe, just before he was due to come around the corner, you had to go in for your tea.
If I could come up with something smart about that, maybe I could stay up at the top desk and wait till she gets back there.
Or you could say the moon's made of green cheese and drop down a plate.
Or you could do the project together, you and a young lady. You get the same marks and maybe end up on the same seat together.
I mean, it's not possible to listen to that without beaming,
No,
is it?
agreed.
And so, life is initially idyllic, and then life becomes less idyllic when suddenly everything starts to become divided, and he suddenly finds himself in the middle of what at times looks like a war zone. Now, what's interesting is that on the one hand, I mean, the film has been compared to John Borman's Hope and Glory, because it's that thing about looking at a period of trouble through the eyes of a child, and the way in which a child sees things. And the film does have a very kind of rather lovely child's eye view of the world. I don't mean childish, I mean child's eye view in the same way that Spielberg would. Also, like Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, it's presented in black and white. And when you asked Branagh about it, he said, well, partly because I remember the past in black and white, and partly because it enabled me to do Infinite Shades of Grey, which fits the deeper subject matter of what's going on in the story. And that black and white is then interrupted with flashes of colour, specifically when they go to the cinema. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is suddenly in full colour. There's a lovely moment in which there's a reflection, a colour reflection in the glasses of his granny, isn't it? And they're watching the screen, and you see the colour reflected. And I mean, throughout cinema, people have done that, black and white. I mean, whether it's Rumblefish or Schindler's List, or that idea about you have a black and white film, but it has little flashes of colour, and it's a technique which is not new and unique, but it's used rather well, and it's used rather well in terms of that. You go to the cinema and everything's in glorious widescreen and Technicolor. The thing I do want to flag up is just what a debt this owes to Terence Davis. And Terence Davis's early films, certainly in that thing about the memory of going to the cinema and the cinema being, magical. There are things in Belfast when you look at it and you look at Buddy looking at the screen and you look at the way in which that's portrayed. That is absolutely something which owes a debt to Terence Davis. And I say that as a compliment. And the reason I say it is because I'm pretty certain that Belfast is going to win Best Picture. I mean, obviously we're not in nominations yet, but it's the reason I think it is because on the one hand, it's, you know, critics like it very much and it feels personal. And on the other hand, ordinary audiences who aren't necessarily cineasts love it. I've seen the film with, I mean, for example, my brother and his partner watched it with us and they loved it. And, you know, they watch films and everything, but they wouldn't consider themselves film buffs. They just film goers and they loved it. They just thought it was great. They knew nothing about it in advance, but they just loved it. And I feel the same way about that, you know, that sweet spot when it comes to a best film is, I mean, I know that things like Power of the Dog are being, you know, very, very touted for best film, but this feels to me like it has that perfect balance. And Terence Davies has a new film which is coming out. I'm a huge fan of Terence Davies, and I just want to kind of acknowledge that this is a field that he has ploughed previously. And you talked about the Van Morrison thing. I mean, the best thing you can say is that you listen to these Van Morrison tunes and you remember what it was like to listen to Van Morrison without feeling conflicted. And there are so many smile out loud moments in the midst of, you know, what can at times be a dark and tumultuous story. Yeah. You'd have to be pretty hard-hearted. Not, I mean, you know, you could say, well, it's, you know, it's slightly schmaltzy and it's slightly, every now and then it's a little sticky. But you'd really have to be a Grinch not to come out of it beaming.
Yes. Also, a point which is going to come up in one of the letters from one of our listeners. There's a sequence towards it. It's not a spoiler, where Jamie Dornan does "Everlasting Love" by The Love Affair,
yes,
which is
a strange moment.
Yeah, but I thought it was terrific, and I love that song. It has one of the greatest openings to a pop song ever.
Yeah,
and it just sings.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, I've seen the movie 3 times now. The last time was with a whole bunch of new people. I hadn't seen it before, and exactly the same experience as you had with your family. They just absolutely.
Yeah. Can I ask you, because about that sequence, did you imagine that it's a fantasy sequence, or that it's, how real is that?
No,
sequence?
I think. I hadn't thought of it as a fantasy. I thought it was real.
Okay.
Anyway,
fine.
let me do these emails, and then we'll come back to you.